And as always, to end the show, we look back on an iconic moment in Rocket League and rewrite history. Because here, hindsight's actually 50-50. 3 years ago this month, after a disappointing last place finish at the RLCS Season 6 Finals, G2 made the move to replace Kronovi with Chicago on their starting roster. This would be the first benching of Kronovi's career, a tough blow for a player who had historically been the leader and most skilled player on every team he'd ever played for. Kronovi would go on to find a new home with Rogue, and the new-look G2 would become runner-up of the Season 7 Finals in New Jersey. But Simpson, what if, instead of replacing Kronovi, G2 had chosen to replace Rizzo instead?
A roster of Kronovi, JNAPs, and Chicago would have had some growing pains inevitably, but I think that this team would have found success. The parallel rise of Squishy in both content creation and the pro scene, and the critical lens of Kronovi being held to the standard of the best player in the world, meant that a slightly poor performance would weigh heavily on Kronovi's shoulders every time. Kronovi always played to live up to that standard for a pretty long time. He was trying to be innovative and aggressive in his playstyles, and that wasn't what was needed. By the time Kronovi did begin adapting into his second and third man role, his career was out of his hands and he was at the liberty of younger players forming rosters around the standings that he had built. And if you take a look at this trade at face value and just assume that Rizzo was then the player to go to Rogue and take Kronovi's place on Rogue, then you have Rizzo with FlyQuest's AJ and Wonder. So, theoretically then, Rizzo paired with AJ ultimately find First Killer as that rogue pickup that does happen down the line. And you have a pretty strong team right out the gates. But in my opinion, I believe this would have stunted AJ's growth as a professional player, missing out on the Knights, the Peeps, before his journey into that phase super team. Because of this, I think it would have potentially stunted the mechanics of NA slightly, and this would have allowed Kronovi the time that was needed to fill the shoes of a leadership position on one of the largest organizations in the world. He may not have been the immediate savior that Dries came to be years down the line, but just being surrounded by JNAPs and Chicago could have relieved some of that pressure that was always on him and allowed him to find that success that was needed with G2.
Well, after finishing in New Jersey, G2 was struggling. They go 2-5 in Season 8. They finish dead last. They miss LAN for the first time since Season 4. So there's question marks there already about kind of how things went down, despite their success in Season 7. Teams above G2 were already beginning to improve. We got Ghost with Mist, Rogue with First Killer. These are potential names for G2 that season if they want to make a move. But they don't. They stick with Rizzo, despite this being an obvious chance for them to improve and try to bounce back. Despite not making a move there, they do bounce back in Season 9. When you look at their standings on paper, things went really well. They look like the #1 team in NA that season with no LAN. But honestly, they only go 6-3 in the regular season, and it's very deceiving that season. I think things were much more of a log jam. We don't really have that top team necessarily. And even though they take down the regular season champs in SSG, that series was ugly. SSG's defense that series was abysmal. Possibly the worst series that I've seen from SSG to date. So coming out of that, they're feeling good. They're the #1 team in NA, so they don't make a move even then. But that was the time to replace Rizzo. Rizzo needed to be gone from that team during the summer of 2020 or before we get into RLCS X. We even see that with Dries coming in and replacing him. And that offseason was ridiculous. The number of players that G2 could have had that offseason is just stupid. And you got Reddles going to Space Station, Squishy going to NRG. Mist and Atomic stick together, but it's G2. They could have had either of those players. So who's that name I just said? Atomic. Who just joined G2? It's Atomic. So what does that mean? G2 could be the current roster they have right now, but they do it a year and a half earlier.